Last week when we were talking about Rabbi Yaakov's view on Zionism, I thought for sure you're going to bring the story of going past Flatbush on Yom Ha'atzmaut and them asking about Zionism and him saying, if I understand correctly, that basically Nebuch, if that's all you got, like that. Sorry,
Well, I mentioned that.
that if that's your
Right,
connection with Yiddishkeit, so b'vakasha, but my
right,
connection is very different.
right. So that goes with the idea that I said when I asked Reb Yaakov both about Chappelle's, and before that I asked him about my shul, if they should say Halam Yom Ha'atzmaut. He said your shul should definitely say Halam Yom Ha'atzmaut because um, that's where Reb Yaakov said his idea, and we'll go over it again today. Actually, from a different article, he said his idea um, that without Medinas Yisrael, a lot of the Jewish people would not have a relationship with Judaism. Okay, um, and therefore, if your relationship with Judaism is dependent upon Medinas Yisrael, then of course you should say Hallel. And he said the same thing about the guys in Chappelle's. He said, did they become frum because of Medinas Yisrael? If they did, they should say Hallel. If they didn't become frum because of Medinas Yisrael, they don't say Hallel. That's the way he looked at it. He looked at it very practically. And I think I mentioned Reb Shlomo Volba when I told us Reb Shlomo Volba, he liked it, but he didn't necessarily agree with it. But I really didn't care because, in other words, in Das Torah, I felt my grandfather was much bigger than Shlomo Volba. Maybe I'm Nugei a bit of her.
You
But
mean your shul in Neve Yaakov? You said that about?
no, no, no. My shul, my father's shul in
Oh,
Eastern.
your father's shul in Efrat.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah. I think if they would say Hal in Neve Yaakov, everybody would become secular. So it's the opposite. Okay.
What
Um,
happened in what happened in your
my
father's show
father's
in the front?
shul, my father's shul was made up. No, not in Efrat. In East New York, Brownsville, my father's shul. This I asked my grandfather, let's say probably in 1975, 76. Um, my father's shul was made up of people, and probably some of you could relate to this. It was made up of people that was still Yiddish speakers and still had an accent in English, but their parents came over in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they went to work when they were 10, 12 years old in New York City. Okay? So they never had a Torah education, but they remained frum because their parents were frum, right? So my father was a Yiddish speaking rabbi for these people. He spoke in Yiddish, and they all knew, even the people who knew English well, from their family, they knew Yiddish because my father's shul, the people that I'm talking about were definitely born close to 1900. I wouldn't say some of them even the late 1800s, but certainly so close to 1900. So those people's relationship when was Medinas Yisrael was founded was very, very. The relationship was very strong to Medinas Yisrael, even though most of these people didn't go through the Holocaust. Okay. I don't know why I'm blurry again over here, but I got to do something. I don't know how that works.
Your
While
voice is good.
yeah, voice is great, but I don't get. Oh, now it's better. I don't get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
I, I could I could tell the Rav why he's blurry, I think,
yeah, yeah.
but this isn't going to necessarily help the Rav. Okay, it's because your camera gets confused on where to focus with your jog, with your movements of your head backwards and forwards.
I actually think you're right because when I'm stiff, it doesn't do it. But if I
Right,
go back and forth, it gets nervous.
right.
The question is there such a camera that understands, yeshivish guys?
Uh, I'm sorry, it's beyond my pay grade.
Anyway, but that's what I asked Reb Yaakov. My father's shul was made up of basically Amoratzim, except for a few guys they really didn't know much. Um, my father would learn with them Mishnayos once a week, a Gemara, but most of them asked questions on the Gemara that were like, "How could that happen, Rabbi?" Like a kashrei famaisa. How could that happen? Those are the guys who really never had an education. They weren't at all. And by the way, their kids all had college educations. Their kids were all fry. Their kids were, except for I know one family. Besides that, every kid became fry, and probably today we're talking about great or great great grandchildren are all married out. You know, but these people were still like, they were religious in a very fundamental way, like very simple way. They didn't know much, right? None of them had a lulav. My father would buy a lulav for the shul, except for 3 or 4 people. No one had a lulav. They walked over, they shook the lulav, that's it. My father, they didn't want to order a lulav for sukkahs. It was very, very pasha to mention. That's what it was. But really good people, hardworking people. Some of them actually made a fair amount of money. But you're talking about, I had a guy in the shul who grew up in the Mir, not the Mir Yeshiva, in the city of Mir. Okay, never set foot into the yeshiva. But he was so proud that he was born in Mir, because Mir had a yeshiva in America and in Israel. He was like proud of it, but he never set foot. I don't know if he knew how to base marriage. What did he do for a living? He was a junk collector. He had a horse. I remember as a very little kid, he had a horse with a wagon behind him. And if you had junk, he would put it in the wagon, right? If you had a radiator you wanted to get rid of, he would break it from the house and he would take it. And during World War II, America needed a ton of that to make weapons. So he became very wealthy from World War II. He was once struck by lightning while he was on his wagon. The lightning struck him and put him in the hospital. You're talking about like simple people, worked really hard, right? He always had a bottle underneath that he took in the winter, and he took a shot, 4 Roses, it was called. He took a shot of whiskey, and then he was good and ready for the next hour. And when I used to ask him, what did you feed the horse? He said, I fed him hay. So I said, where did you get hay? He says, I opened up the siddur. It said hay in the siddur. I said, here, hay. This is the type of thing that they spoke about. But so my father said, even though they didn't grow up, they weren't part of the Holocaust, Baruch Hashem. They were in America from the late early 1900s, right? But they had the relationship of a Medinas Yisrael to them was such an uplifting experience that for them, my father said they should say Hallel and Yom Ha'atzmaut, right? But a regular person that's a real, that came from a Torah environment that would be from without Medinas Yisrael, like my grandfather said about himself. Whether Medinas Yisrael came about or not, I would still be from today, right? So there's it. But I'll tell you, someone like, let's say, the Chappelles, right? David and Fella Chappelle, they had a very big spiritual uplifting from Medinas Yisrael. If you asked them, they would tell you. I mean, if they were around, then they already passed away. But I'm sure if you asked the Chappelles, they would tell you they got such an energy from Medinas Yisrael being there, then the 67 war, which many of us really got that. There's no question about it, right? So
I want to clarify. You ask a question of your grandfather whether the Chappelle's yeshiva should say Hallel and Yom Ha'atzmaut, or whether David and Phila Chappelle's as individuals should say.
No. The Chappelle school.
David and the Pesach was yes.
Yeah, and he said yes. It came about because Reb Shlomo Wolbe said that I told Reb Shlomo Wolbe that someone spoke Lashon Hara on Chappelle's. So it was a mashgiach in a yeshiva. I can't go into which yeshiva, it was a mashgiach yeshiva. So a guy from Chappelle's who went to this yeshiva said that the mashgiach told me that I went to, I think he went to Yale University. He said, do you know how many years it's going to take you to get Yale out of your system? This is what the mashgiach told the guy. Do you know how many years it's going to take to get Yale out of the system? And the guy went to Chappelle's, so he never heard that in Chappelle's, that, Rabbi Kamenetsky never said to him, do you know how many years it's going to take to get, Yale out of the system? So when he came back to me about it, right? So I said, Rabbi Meiselman has a doctorate from MIT. Ask him how many years it's going to take Rabbi Meiselman to get that out of the system, right? That's what I said to him. But at the end of the day, the guy spoke Lashon Hara about it. So Shlomo Wolbe said, why do you think he spoke Lashon Hara? So I said, maybe because we say Hallel and Yom Ha'atzmaut. So he says to me, why do you say Hallel and Yom Ha'atzmaut? That's what he says to me. So I said to him, I asked Reb Yaakov, and this is what Reb Yaakov said. So he liked the idea. He thought it was very original. a very original approach, but he says, I don't know if I agree with it. But that didn't bother me, because Reb Yaakov doesn't have to ask Reb Shlomo Wolbe Psak Halacha. He really doesn't have to ask him. Anyway, but the point over here is that Reb Shlomo Wolbe went back to the Mashkiach, and he said to him, he met him at a wedding, and he said to him, just because Chappelle's says Hal on Yom Ha'atzmaut, you have to talk Lashon Hara on them? Now, I didn't know that the Mashkiach would even know that we said Hal. I just theorized that maybe he doesn't like us saying Hal on Yom Ha'atzmaut. I don't know, but Shlomo Wolbe didn't remember all that. So he said, just because they say Hal on Yom Ha'atzmaut, yeah, talk Lashon Hara on them, that's not enough to talk Lashon Hara. By the way, he denied talking Lashon Hara about it, but I heard it from one of the guys of Chappelle's. In any event, the point, let's go back for a second. When what Michael Sitcher brought up, that's really that's what Reb Yaakov said in that footnote in Emes Yaakov on Parshas, I think it was Bo, that Reb Yaakov said that the first comment Reb Yaakov made was I think that was a Baal Peh comment. And Rav Daniel Neustadt says that Reb Yaakov said that this idea of an NCSY weekend, it could be that Medinas Yisrael is like that also, because without Medinas Yisrael, a lot of people would have fallen away from Judaism. Now, I brought in last week Sefer Shmuel, where that's the third place, but it's very different, I said, than the first two places. Okay, Reb Yaakov says it in all the different places, but it's different. Because the first two places, Mitzrayim and Chagai, the Migdash Sheni, are all ideas of a NCSY weekend. In Mitzrayim was a short weekend in that God wanted. In Chagai, it's a 430-year weekend. Okay, to prepare us for the greater exile. Here in Sefer Shmuel, it says the Aron was not brought back to the Mishkan, and Rabbi Yaakov says it's very similar to in the second Beis Hamikdash. The Aron was not brought back to the Beis Hamikdash because it was not really a real geula. Okay, but here no one's saying in Sefer Shmuel that wasn't a total geula, that the people are going to leave Eretz Yisrael. That wasn't part of the cheshbon. Okay, Reb Yaakov never says that. It's not part of the cheshbon. So in that sense, it's very different. All Reb Yaakov is saying over here is that even in Eretz Yisrael, you could have a matzav where there's not yet a geula shlema. Okay, that's Yaakov doesn't say it in those words, but I'm positive he means that. The Aron was not brought back. The Navi says the Aron was for 20 years, all the way till the time of David HaMelech, in the house of Aminadav, right? In Kiryat Yearim, right? It was not brought back because the Jews were not ready to build the Beis Hamikdash. Why were they not ready? Because they had to do a lot of tshuva yet, and they had to fix themselves, right? So that to me is very much like Medinas Yisrael. Okay, Medinas Yisrael is not. Reb Yaakov doesn't mean it's a stopover. He means there's no geula yet, right? I don't know what he calls a tchalta de geula, not a tchalta geula, right? I'm not going into that, but there's definitely no geula. And then he goes on to say here, because he compares what happened with the Aron in the house of Aminadav, right? And what happened with the second Beis Hamikdash, that they didn't bring the Aron back. But at the end, he says, so why did David bring up the Aron? If the Beis Hamikdash wasn't there yet, why are you bringing up the Aron? So that's on that's number 3 from last week. And that's Shim Mem Ches. And there it says, David, it says over there in Shim Mem Ches, do you see that from last week? Page Shim Mem Ches. Okay, so the new paragraph on the right side, Uma she'ela David es ha'aron. Hainu shahaya b'daitu livnos beis habayis. He wanted to build a Beis Hamikdash. So even though he hadn't built it yet, his idea was to build a Beis Hamikdash, right? V'chein mochiach seder ha'psukim. And that the hochacha is, in other words, the proof is the order of the psukim. Shemetchila kavashet Yerushalayim, right? And then, right after the next chapter, it says, And what did he do? He called Nasan Hanavi, and he said, I want to build a base medrash. What do you think? And he got a haskama, Reb Yaakov, and this is a ksav yad from Reb Yaakov. He says, mitzad halacha, he got it. Ela sheba nevu al yedei Nasan shelo yivnei abayis ela beno. But he got a nevuah that overrode what Nasan himself got a nevuah which overrode what he told David to build a base Hamikdash. But the fact that he told David to build a base Hamikdash means he felt it was the right time. Okay, the right time. You could bring the Aron back, 100%, no problem, right? So that's all Reb Yaakov means. So if you're comparing it to Eretz Yisrael today, right, it doesn't mean that we're going to be here for a while and then we'll be going out to Galut again. That could be true. I never heard anybody say it before. Well, my father asked Rav Herzog, my father got smicha for Rav Herzog. He asked Rav Herzog. Rav Herzog said, I have rayas from Tanach that there's only 2 churbanot, there won't be a third churban. That's what he said. Reb Yaakov didn't use that language, but Reb Yaakov never said that we're going to be leaving again, and therefore, I understand this is what Reb Yaakov meant, is that we're not ready for the Geula Shlema yet. Now,
Your father got a smicha from Herzog?
for Rav Herzog. My father got smicha for Rav Herzog.
Oh, when he was in
1940.
Hebron.
What?
When he was in Hebron.
Yes.
Why did he ask from Rav Herzog?
Okay, let me explain. He asked for Reb Chatzkel Sarna, because Reb Chatzkel Sarna was the Rosh Hashiva of Hebron.
Right.
He asked
Right.
for Issa Zalman Meltzer, because Issa Zalman Meltzer was a very great Rav in Lithuania, and he felt that a great Rav in Lithuania, his smicha is very chashuv, more than a Rosh Hashiva.
Right.
Okay. Then someone said to him, you better take smicha from Rav Herzog. So he said, why? Your question. So he says, because no one ever heard of Rav Zal Meltzer except in the yeshiva world, and no one ever heard of Chatzkel Sarna except the yeshiva. But when you say to someone, I have smicha from the chief rabbi of Israel, right? That's a different ballgame. And let me tell you, I don't know who told it to my father. I don't remember my father telling, I don't know, but he was so right. Listen to this. My father had an accident with his car. Now, my father didn't know how to drive, but sometimes the accident wasn't his fault. Okay. But he didn't know how to drive. Okay. He was Eastern European. You know, I don't know if you ever read the Silver Era from Rabbi. It's a great book that he wrote on Eliezer Silver. What's his name? He talks with a Bronx accent. Why you got
Aaron Rakefet Rothkopf.
right, Rav Aaron Rakefet Rothkopf. So he wrote the book The Silver Era. It's very good to read. I heard they republished it. Right. If you want to know about America in the 1920s and 30s, and he was a Gaon, he was a gigantic. He drove, and he didn't know how to drive. He was Eastern European. He was in Cincinnati. The mayor of Cincinnati used to tell people between this and this time, don't be driving on the road. Because Rev Blazer Silver is going to be driving to shul, and it'll definitely cause an accident. So nobody used to drive on those streets that he drove to shul. Okay? So my father knew a little bit better than him, but not great. So my father had an accident, but with his mazel, right, it was an accident with a police car. Okay? You never want to get into an accident with a police car. Okay? So what happened was, my father claimed that the police car went from made a right turn. He had a siren on, and he couldn't see because the right turn he made into a different lane. There was a bus in front of him, so he couldn't see it. So he hit him. Okay, so they went to court. Okay, and the policeman said that he saw me and he didn't stop and he hit me. I'll never forget it. And he sued my father because he had to go to the hospital. He was okay, basically, no problem. But so the judge said to my father, he's claiming that you're lying. So my father said, I don't lie. He says, it says here you're a rabbi, right? But who gave you ordination, Rabbi Shurin? So he said, the chief rabbi of Israel, Rav Herzog. He goes, case dismissed. So the guy who told my father, if my father would have said, Rabissa Zalman Meltzer, yeah, I don't even have to say, Michael already said it for me. You just start laughing.
But he could have gotten smicha from both of them.
Right, no problem. He got from Rissa Zalman, but someone said to him before he left Eretz Yisrael, you can't leave without getting for Rav Herzog. So he went to Rav Herzog, and he got the smicha. Anyway, again,
Reb Shurin,
yeah.
Reb Shurin.
Yeah.
Did the Reb say that when Nathan Hanavi that it was a nevuah, or when he said not to build it, or was it a psak halacha type?
Okay, so the way that I wanted to come back to the way Reb Yaakov writes it is who kibel askama livnot et habayit mitzad halacha, right? He said, in other words, on the spot, Nasar Novi said, right? He didn't tell him in a day for that. On the spot, he said, Kol masha belibcha ta'aseh, right? Ela shaba nevu al yidei nasan, the same person, shulo yivneh bais ela beno. The next day comes back, he said, I got a nevuah that you're not building the base measure. Now, the fact that he uses mitzad halacha, he gave him reshus, doesn't really make sense. Why? Because if he gave him reshus al pi halacha, nevuah can't come and override that. According to halacha, you can't. A navi can't come and say, this is not the halacha. Basically, you probably would chop his head off if he did. So Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky already raises that question. Well, he says like this. Where is that?
95.
Ain't kavanas rabbeinu livsok halacha mamish. Ela kavanasei ledas Torah. Shel nasan hanavi shenenu nevuah. He meant das Torah. He didn't mean tzad halacha. He meant das Torah. Now, Reb Yaakov writes this in Shmuel Beis. When he talks about this issue, he writes the word das Torah. He doesn't write halacha. So it could be the slip of a pen here. I don't know. But it can't mean halacha. Reb Yaakov knew that once you say halacha, nevuah can't override it. So he says it means das Torah because that's the word that Reb Yaakov uses in another place. In Shmuel Beis, when that story actually happens, I remember that's what Reb Yaakov said. And I said to Reb Yaakov, you mean a gadol b'Torah could be wrong in his das Torah? And he said to me, yes, he can. Yeah. He said in Yiddish, he says, yeah. He says, it seems like he can be wrong in das Torah. Now, nobody ever wants to hear that. What? Das Torah is, like you can't be wrong. Chas v'sholom, right? So he said, no, you see, you could be wrong in das Torah. But in the
halacha here could be halacha v'lo l'maisa. In the limud, like the lumdus of it is that it could build a base of mikdash, but not l'maisa. It's not halacha in the way that you and I.
Hey, you could kvetch. I don't mind kvetching. But Reb Yaakov Kamenetsky says what Reb Yaakov says in another place. It's das Torah. Right? Nevuah comes and overrides das Torah. Because he didn't have a raya for it in halacha. Right? Reb Yaakov used to say when he didn't have a raya, he used to say in Yiddish, you say, mein Hart zokt mir. Libi Omerli. Right, Libi Omerli. Right? I was walking down the street with him in Far Rockaway after I got married. And I said, I know the Zayda doesn't hold from the Eruv in most places like Far Rockaway. Can I carry my watch in Far Rockaway? So he says, I don't have a raya, but mein Hart sagt mir that it's mutter. And then he looked at my watch and he said, your watch is not even a shiloh because it was a gold watch. And he says a gold watch is jewelry, so it's not even a shiloh that you could do. Okay? But Reb Yaakov was very machmar on Eruvim, so he didn't even carry in Far Rockaway, even though it had good haskamas from Talmidim of Moshe. I think from Moshe Feinstein also saw it. But he didn't. But my point is that that's what he used to say. Mein Hart zokt mir. Right? We didn't have a raya from a Gemara. That's what he used to say. So that's sort of like a venerally of the Rush. The Rush says venerally sometimes without a raya. The Rambam also says once in a while. The Rambam in the Yad HaChazakah says venerally, right? Which that means he doesn't have a raya. But what is it? What is his raya? His raya is that he knew Kol HaTorah Kula, and based on Kol HaTorah Kula, he knew. Rabbi Zalman Meltzer corrected the Ramban on Shas. His Ramban on Shas, because it's got tons of mistakes. Okay, and obviously the new Rambans were put out, like the Rajbas, the Rans, right? So all those mistakes were corrected. Okay, so somebody wrote, I don't remember where I read it, but someone wrote that Rabbi Zalman Meltzer, without any ktav yad, got 80% of his corrections correct. 80% were correct without a ktav yad. Okay, so sometimes after learning the Ramban for so many years, you can figure out if this is what the Ramban said, or you have to change a word or something, or there's a misspelling here or miswriting here, whatever it is, right? Salman Meltzer was a lamdinotzim, and of course he was he studied Ramban his whole life, I'm sure, on Shas, so he was able to do that. So a lot of times when you have Kol Torah Kula in your head and you say Venera Li, you're putting together all the Kol Torah Kula. So that's what Nasan Hanavi was saying, Venera Li. He didn't have a raya, but Venera Li, that's the right time. And then God comes along and says, the Nevuah says differently, because nobody knows better than God. So you have to be nichnet to God. But that's what he means over here. You could fetch what Michael is saying, is that halacha v'lo l'maisa, because today they have a lot of people that say that. Like Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach used to say about his chocolate. Ha'adama on chocolate, he used to say, Za'alacha v'lo l'maisa. So Chappelle's guy asked him what bracha he makes on chocolate. He says, Shakol. So he says, but you wrote a tshuva for this, you make Adam. He says, but the world's not knowing like that. So I make like the world is knowing. I make a Shakol. So that's halacha v'lo l'maisa, right? Anyway, so that's what it is. Now, I told you that there's one more piece of Reb Yaakov on this issue of Eretz Yisrael, an important piece, that this is not from the Ksav Yad, but it's from a cassette tape that Reb Yaakov said on Sefer Malachim. That is number 4 and 5 from last week. Okay?
Wait, Rabbi Shurin, did you go over the piece in Chagai? Did I miss that?
Yes. I went over. You can listen on the tape.
Okay.
Unless I made a mistake. I'm almost positive we went over it. Yes, we went over it. Okay. Listen, I said a tape. I mean a recording. Okay. Anyway, in Sefer Malachim, there's a very famous piece, okay, that Reb Yaakov said a pshat in, that Reb Eliezer Voldenberg said a pshat in, which I sent you today, and that Reb Aaron Soloveitchik said a pshat in, all the same pshat in this piece of Navi. The same pshat, but each one with their own kvetch. And I know I'm going to gay but I like Reb Yaakov's kvetch the best. Okay? So we're going to go through the 3 pieces so you can appreciate it. First, we'll go through Reb Yaakov. And again, it very much relates to Medinas Yisrael. Okay? And this is basically the source. Okay? These psukim we're about to see are the source that the Hashgacha oversees the Jewish people, that they shouldn't really fall apart. Now, we've seen it once with Rabbi Yaakov about the NCSY weekend, right? That the Jews are going to fall apart is an NCSY weekend, right? And now we're going to see the same thing about Eretz Yisrael in the time of the Malachim, right? In time of the Beis HaMikdash, towards the end. And Rabbi Yaakov is going to apply this to Medinas Yisrael as well. Okay, so let me just get the psukim here. So it's in page Reish Chaf Ches from last week, and it's Malachim Beis, chapter Yudalit. Now, you could be that all of you know this piece because you see that three different people say the same thing about. And I know that Reb Yaakov never spoke to Reb Eliezer Voldenberg. I have no doubt. And I know Reb Eliezer Voldenberg didn't speak to Reb Aaron Soloveitchik, and I can't know for sure, I doubt Reb Aaron Soloveitchik ever spoke to Reb Yaakov about this. So when 3 people come up with the same idea from a text, to me, there's nothing to talk about. It's Amito Shel Torah. Eres la Amito Shel Torah. Okay? By the way, Reb Yaakov used to build this on stories. If a story was true, right, he had a story that he used to say over he heard from somebody. I don't remember from who. And Rav Soloveitchik used to say the same story, heard it from somebody else completely. And Reb Yaakov said, if he says the same story that I'm saying, then it must be 100% true because we heard it from completely different sources, right? Okay, so now in chapter Yudalit, Malachim Beis, chapter Yudalit, Pasuk Chav 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 Zayin. So what is this talking about over here? It's talking about Yerovim ben Yoash, Melech Yisrael, v'Shomron, Arbon v'Achat Shana. He was a king in Shomer for 41 years, And the pasuk says, pasuk Chav Dalet, Vayas hara b'nei Hashem lo sor mikol chatos Yeravam ben Nevat asher yichet Israel. He didn't move from all the sins of Yeravam, the first Yeravam, right? He did evil in the eyes of God. And then the pasuk says something quite amazing. Hu heishiv es gvul Yisrael milavo chamos ad hayom ha'arava kidvar Hashem Elokei Yisrael shediber biyad avdo Yonah ben Amitai hanovi asher migat hachefer. And he returned all the land from Hamas in the north until the Yam HaRava, till the Dead Sea in the south, like the words of God that spoke in the hand of Avda Yonah ben Amitai, our famous Navi, right? Who we find out here, not in Sefer Yonah, but here, Migat HaChefer. He was from the north. He was from Zvulun. Okay? If you didn't know where, now you know that he was a 10-tribe man. He grew up in the 10 tribes, and he was very worried about the 10 tribes. Okay? Now, the pasuk adds something, because there's something very strange here, right? The pasuk is really bothered with something. What do you mean? He did evil in the eyes of God, and he got back all the land that Israel lost to their enemies. That doesn't make sense. How does that happen? How are you a Russia and you get back all the land? Ki ra'a Hashem es ani Yisrael morem ma'od ve'efes atzur ve'efes azuv ve'ein ozel Yisrael ve'lo diber Hashem limchos Hashem Yisrael mitachas hashamayim v'yoshiyim biyad Yeravam ben Yoash. So this is very interesting. The pasuk actually gives a reason why he got the land back. Why? So it says because he saw that the Jewish people were miskenim, moreh ma'od, right? God saw that there was very, very, the Jewish people were very, very downtrodden. Ve'efes atzur ve'efes azul ve'ein la'ozer Yisrael. This is an expression. What does he say in the English? He says, for Hashem had seen that Israel's suffering was very severe, and none surviving and none remaining, okay? And there was no helper for Israel. Most Mefarshim don't learn exactly like the translation here. The Mefarshim learn, there was no king that was able to really connect with the nation. And and God would not hear of wiping out the name of the Jewish people from underneath the heaven. And therefore he saved in the hands of Yeravam ben Yoash. Okay? So there's an unbelievable yesod here that Reb Yaakov right away takes advantage of. He says like this. Shnei psukim elu hem keminit natzlut shel sefer malachim haketzad etzliach Yeravam ben Yoash lo shivet gvul Yisrael milavo chamos ad yam ha'arava b'shenem olav sha'asa hara b'nei Hashem v'lo sor mikol chatos Yeravam ben Nevat. These psukim of Chav Vav and Chav Zayin are a hit natzlut. It's an excuse, a parenthetic excuse of the Navi who wrote Sefer Malachim, which is Yirmiyahu, right? Of what is it an excuse for? It's an excuse. How did the Jews manage to be victorious with a Russia? And the understanding of the Yeshuas Yisrael under this king, Yeravam ben Yoash, the Russia, is understood in two parts. Now, he's going to learn up the psukim. Watch this. Echad ki ra'ez Hashem es ani Yisrael al derech ma shekosav b'shmos beis chafei. He saw the ani Yisrael. Vayar Elokim es b'nei Yisrael vayed Elokim. It says at the beginning of Sefer Shmos, when God decided to send Moshe, God saw b'nei Yisrael hurting, and God knew. V'anaga kazot bo ketotzah. Why did that come? Like it says in the pasuk before. Vatal shavasam Elokim min avodah. Dahainu shetzoakim lo mitoch chazara b'tshuva אלא זועקים כי מכירים שהקדוש ברוך שהריבונו של עולם יכול לעזור. In other words, it says they're calling, they're davening, they're wailing, right? Shava came to God because of, not because of tshuva, because they were working so hard, they were being tortured. So Reb Yaakov says they're not yelling because chazorah b'tshuva. They're yelling because they know God is the only one that can do anything here. No one else is able to help them. So they're screaming, God help us. Now they're doing tefillah without tshuva. Okay, there's some merit to that. This is one type of tefillah. The Medrash says it's one of the 10 languages of tefillah. To like scream, God help me, right? Even though it's not the best tefillah, it's a lacking tefillah, pachot. Misapeked he, I think maybe it should be mistapeked he, or misapeked he, Sharabonu Shalom, Yochus al amo, that God should have mercy on his nation. It's enough to daven, right? You know, we know that there's no, what do they say? There's no atheist in the foxhole. So a lot of times a guy's going to daven, but he's not going to necessarily do tshuva. But he's praying to God, help me, right? And that is also called a tefillah. By the way, Reb Yaakov, I don't know if he knew this, but Reb Yosef Albo in Sefer Yikarim writes beferish that tefillah without tshuva does help. Okay? It's a different mode of how it helps. He calls it attacking. It doesn't attack, it attacks the symptom, not the cause, right? In other words, tshuva attacks the cause, right? I did an aveira. Tefillah can attack the symptom. I'm getting punished because of the aveira. I want to get rid of the punishment, not necessarily do tshuva, right? That's the way Rabbi Yitzchak Shurin puts it. So Rabbi Yaakov is saying similar, that there is a certain lashon of tefillah that's not the best lashon, but it's enough to help the Jewish people. And you see, God sends Moshe because of it. The second thing in this pasuk we see is that God would not allow the Jewish people's name to be erased from underneath the heaven. Like it was at the end of the Shoah, the Holocaust, that he gave a Medina for the Sheirit HaPleita, for the remnant. So what does he say here? There's two Yesodis in this pasuk. One is at the beginning of the pasuk, right? That it said, Kira Hashem es Ani Yisrael. That's one Yesod. When God sees the Jews are suffering, sometimes he just, and they pray to God, and they like by Mitzrayim, their sha'avat comes up to heaven, God will stop their suffering, right? There's another thing here, is that when you're going to destroy the Jewish people completely, he's gonna mix in God. He's not going to let it happen. Okay? So now, that's the two things he says in this pasuk. He says like this, Ki anatzim, in the next page, Reish Chav Tes, Ki anatzim lagu lahem ayeh Elohekechem. Where is your God? They used to laugh at the Jewish people. Where's your God? He doesn't seem to be helping you. Like, did he fall asleep? Right? Ad shegiya matzav shelo yodu ma yiyeh. Ki kulam chutz mikam yechidim ibdu et ha'amuna v'ratzon lios Yehudim. Until it reached a level that they didn't know what's going to be with the Jewish people. Because ki kulam, except for individuals, ibdu et emunah, they lost their emunah after World War II. V'ratzon lios Yehudim, and the will to be a Jew. Ubechdei shelo yimcha shem Yisrael mitachas hashamayim nivnas ha'medina. In order that God's name, that the Jewish people's name the Jewish people should not cease to exist, right? God came in and created a Medina. Okay? Kimo kein hoshim biyad Yeravam. V'od nitrachva ma'machto asher be'etzem lo yekedai. Like the same thing with Yeravam. Not only did he was victorious, but his malchus became larger than anything ever before. even though it wasn't Kedai because he was a Rasha. This is one of the built-in ways that our Hashgacha works. So Reb Yaakov now came up with a new. Till now we had Derech Hashgacha is an NCSY weekend. Now there's a new Hashgacha, where there's Hashgacha when the Jewish people are going to be destroyed completely. God steps in. Now in this case, Hitler did 2/3 of the work, and Reb Yaakov says the last third would have been done by the Jews themselves. They would have said, obviously there's no God. Obviously we can't be Jews anymore because we see that there can't be a God that allows 6 million Jews to be killed. So what did God show? 3 years later, he built the Medina, and that revitalized the Jewish DNA, right? And that's what Reb Yaakov says. That's what we learn from Yeravim ben Yoash. From the second half of Yeravim ben Yoash, the first half was Yitzias Mitzrayim, meaning that's the Darkei Hashgacha is when the Jews are screaming, even if they don't do tshuva, but they're screaming that no one else can help, right? That God's going to bring a geula, or when they're screaming, or not screaming, but when they're leaving Judaism in droves, and Judaism won't be left. Again, this is Darkei Hashgacha. This is the way Reb Yaakov puts it, and I like Reb Yaakov. I told you the best how he puts it. I'll soon show you how the other people put it, right? And you'll see that I feel that Reb Yaakov was much more sophisticated, but they're all saying the same idea from this pasuk. This pasuk is a proof that God can bring a geula, right? Even Reb Yaakov doesn't really say it exactly, but even through a Russia, he brings a geula because of these two ideas in the pasuk. They don't sort of get into two ideas. They sort of look at it as one thing, but they look at this as the source, right? And the first one is Reb Aaron Soloveitchik. Reb Aaron Soloveitchik today, number one. Now, I underlined on page 183, but in 182...
Was there a new source sheet sent out?
Yeah, today. You didn't get it?
It was just sent just before this year. It was sent.
Right. I had my grandchildren here, and I was what do you call it? I was barbecuing hot dogs for them, so I didn't have time before it did. So, but
Oh, just got.
You didn't get it yet? No one got it?
Yeah.
Oh, it came in?
Just came in, yeah. Okay.
So in page one, number one, right? I wrote number one, page 182. So you could read through the whole thing. It's an article Reb Aaron Soloveitchik wrote in his book called Logic of the Heart, Logic of the Mind. And the name of the article is Israel's Independence, in the Israel Day of Independence. And he has a whole article on that. And you know that the Soloveitchiks had an interesting way of looking at Medinas Yisrael, at Israel's Independence Day, Yom Yerushalayim. So he says like this on page 182, even though I didn't underline it, it's like before that piece that quotes Sefer Malachim, the indented piece, that's the piece that we have here in the Tanach that I read you. But it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines from before that piece. Consequently, we cannot ignore the significance of the establishment of the state of Israel simply because Jews who stand a substantial distance from any form of observance of mitzvahs were at the forefront of the founding of the state, the forefront of founding the state. In other words, he says just because Ben Gurion and secular people, you can't assume that you can now ignore it because it was founded by secular people. Perhaps the fact that non-observant Jews are in the forefront today is a penalty for Orthodox Jewish failure to play the more important part in the formation of the state. Maybe they didn't, right? They didn't get enough involved, right? So that's why. But that's the most important part is Reb Aaron Soloveitchik quotes the psukim that we quoted. That's, the indentation of the psukim, page 183. If you go down to where I underlined it, now the question arises: Why did Yeravim ben Yoash, certainly no greater a tzaddik than Ben Gurion, merit such a great privilege? He wasn't a greater tzaddik than Ben Gurion, Rabbi Aaron Soloveitchik says. So why did he get such a great thing happening to him, that he was so victorious and took back Eretz Yisrael from the enemies? In answering this question, we will also be able to answer the question how any relief, any form of gula can take place for the Jewish people, and the Jews have not prepared themselves for it through universal repentance. How does it happen without repentance? Which Reb Yaakov touches on as well. Many raise the question as to why during the reign of David and Shlomo, when the Jews complied with the principles of the Torah and there was almost no idol worship, the boundaries of Israel were not as extensive as they were during the reign of Yeravim ben Yoash, when the bulk of the Jewry of the kingdom of Israel followed his example and were idol worshippers. The answer is, and God had not said that he would erase the name of Israel from under the heavens, so he saved them by the hand of Yeravim ben Yoash. During the reign of Yeravim ben Yoash, had this deliverance not be realized by God, then the name of Israel could have been wiped out. That's what it says in the text. Similarly, 800 years ago, in the time of the Rambam, and 500 years ago, in the time of the Shulchan Aruch, a Jewish state was not indispensable for the survival of the Jewish people. The Jews, next page, survived very well. They suffered, but they survived. And they blossomed intellectually and spiritually in time of the Rishonim, in the Rambam's time, and the Shulchan Aruch's time, in Tzfat. But after the experience of the Nazi Holocaust, the Jewish people could not survive any longer without a state. Very clear. Okay? The state was dead. Again, the Holocaust brought about. Now, he doesn't go into the idea that Reb Yaakov went into 2 weeks ago, that the Jewish people, and here he also mentions it, Reb Yaakov, that the Jewish people have fallen away. He doesn't go into that, and I think that's an important part. I think if you asked him, he'd say that's what I mean over here, that it couldn't survive because people would just forget after the Holocaust, forget about their Judaism. Right? But Reb Yaakov says it out. And he also, Reb Yaakov says, Zu echad midarkei hashkacha. Now, again, Rabbi Soloveitchik probably means that. But Reb Yaakov felt he had to say it out, that this is the darkei hashkacha. NCSY weekends, not letting the Jewish people get destroyed. Darkei hashkacha is when that's going to happen, you know God is going to mix in. There's no two ways about it. Okay? Now to the what do you call it? To the Reb Eliezer Voldenberg, which I quoted the piece, but I only want a little piece. You could read the whole piece by yourself. It's in the 7th volume of Reb Eliezer Voldenberg. I don't remember Simon Mem Aleph in, and there he talks about, someone asks him the question, how could we come to Eretz Yisrael? How can we make Aliyah when the state is being run by secular people? And that's what the tshuva is about. But the most important part is, umamela, where I underline, Gama Niskel El, Nikva L'Shem Kach, L'Shamesh Lanu Migdal Or, Vaspaklarya Meira, L'Chol Hitrachashut, B'Meshach. What? You hear?
No, I just coughed.
What?
I just coughed.
Oh, okay. So he says, again, he quoted before all the psukim about Yeravim ben Yoash, and he says, right, this becomes a migdal or a spaklarya meira, that all's going to happen in the Meshach Hadoros, that we learn from him a cloud, an unfolding of generations. Him came mi arov lanu miyitkal kaf yadenu. He's very poetic. She'anu b'zmanenu lo hayinu achar hashmada gedol shel gdola shel tzorer ha'anoshiyut Hitler yamach shemo gam kein bebchina shel mora ma'od ve'efes azuv ve'eno zer liYisrael. You know, these are the quotes, the paraphrase of the psukim. Al kolpana lo pachot me'az. Certainly Hitler would have destroyed the Jewish people, not any less than the time of Yeravim ben Yoash. We don't even exactly know in the time of Yeravim ben Yoash what happened that the Jewish people would be destroyed, right? But here we know very clearly. Adamos, right? That there was, he says, I think that there was never such a wicked, achzoriet means wicked, what? Or cruel, right? Cruel destruction like this, and the size of it was so great from the time man was created. Lo diber limchot et shem Yisrael mitachas hashamayim. Lochein biotenu zkukim miyad ka'avir leneshima. Therefore, after the Holocaust, we would need it immediately, like air to breathe. Lemedina atzma'it al karka mutzak lanu kartzenu. We needed a Medina. Azal lanu Hashem barachamav agdolim biyad eila she'achazu kol azman behege hanaga halumit. That God chose the people who were in charge, because that's the people who are in charge. They were ready and they were set up. He doesn't say what Rabbi Soloveitchik says. The front people should have been ready too. He doesn't criticize the front people. He just says the secular people were ready, right? And therefore, God didn't look at that. He looked at who could bring the Medina Shol into existence. And you can't know what God's thinking. And we have to do the mitzvahs. And one of the mitzvahs is to come to Eretz Yisrael and inhabit it. And the more from people he says that inhabit it, the better it'll be. But again, I like Reb Yaakov better, even though they're all saying the same thing, because Reb Yaakov turns it into a klal of darkei hashgacha. He turns it, and he does say, the other people don't really talk about people becoming fry after the Holocaust, right? Reb Yaakov really discusses this at great length in a lot of different places, how people just fell away from their Judaism because they were so angry or so fed up. Okay, we'll stop here, guys. We'll take it up next week. Bezrat Hashem.
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Toda rabah.